Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Israel Connection. I'm Esti, and today I have a very special guest for you. I've been following him for years on social media. I used to be a little bit active on social media back in 2018, 2019, when things happened in Israel. And I was there advocating for Israel, particularly on Twitter at the time. He was one of the main voices out there and still is one of the very main voices. He's currently, people would say he's one of the most trusted voices on the issue of Israel and anti-Semitism. And his name is Hen Mazzig, and I'm very excited to introduce him. He is a globally recognized speaker, educator, author, and digital influencer who has become a trusted voice on Jewish issues in Israel, appearing as an expert in media across 4 continents, including outlets like BBC, CNN, The Washington Post, SkyNews, New York Times, and more. So without further ado, enjoy our conversation with me and Hen Mazzig. Hi, Hen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Esti.
It's a pleasure having you on the Israel Connection podcast. So I introduced you earlier with everything that you do, and it's been, you've been doing so much in the past few years. And I know that a lot of our listeners know you from the past year, particularly with everything that's been going on in Israel. So you've been, like I said, you've been very active in the past few years. What got you to start doing all of these things, since the beginning?
So, after my military service, I moved to Seattle. I lived in the Pacific Northwest, whilst most of my friends went east after their service, because I served for another 2 years. So I served in total 5 years as an IDF commander, humanitarian officer. But I was too late to go to the east with my friends, so I decided to go west, and I went to Seattle, and I've started speaking on college campuses and through several organizations. I worked with Hillel, and I worked with Stand With Us, and I worked with many pro-Israel organizations, Israel Campus Coalition, and I've seen the situation on college campuses being so dire, and I wanted to do something to solve it. Back then it was on a much lower scale than we see it today, and I wanted to get involved, and I started writing articles and sharing my ideas on social media, on Twitter and on Instagram. That was back in 2012. Wow, it's a long time ago. And
it's been a while, yeah.
Yeah. And I kept doing it, and I saw that it had an impact, and it changes people's minds, and people were thanking me for speaking up, and I saw how important it was, and I just kept doing it since then. And on October 7th, while many new voices that came into the fold in the last year, in the last 15 months or so, have been so shocked by what they've seen. I was shocked, of course, but I was not as shocked as other people. I have seen it starting, and I've seen how it evolved around the world, and it was really scary to see the scale of these attacks and this the anti-Semitism that we're seeing on social media today. And I wanted to continue fighting it, and having the expertise and the background and doing it for over a decade now, I know what words to use based on our data research that I'm doing at the Tel Aviv Institute. I know what words are more helpful. I know what to avoid. And often when fighting against anti-Semitism, we're not trying to sell Coca-Cola or McDonald's or a brand of a car. We're doing something that is very emotional and very personal to us. And I think that a lot of the people that are engaging online today are not being as responsible with what they're saying and what they're posting. And while it might feel good for a lot of the Jewish followers that thinking that, maybe something more explicit and more aggressive maybe would be better, I found in the last, again, over a decade doing it and the work we're doing at the Tel Aviv Institute, that often it's not the right answer. The most intuitive answer is not the best one. And if it was, we would probably not be in the situation that we are today. If people were right about Israel PR, maybe the PR was not as bad as it is today.
Yeah, it's very lacking, to say the least.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and also it's, you know, lack of efforts. Like no, like no officials put any effort into it.
Yeah.
We had Elon Levy for a little bit this year, but he was kicked out. So there's not there's not a person in the Knesset or, you know, anything like an official, a government official that does that.
Yeah, but I mean, even Elon Levy, we've measured and I looked at his content and the way that he behaves in interviews. While it feels good for us, maybe for some people, to see someone rolling his eyes at the anchor, people that are not involved are not sympathetic towards it. People that are not on our side already, when they see someone just mocking an interviewer or doing things that are just juvenile, it's not really the best way to address it. So even the efforts that were put in place were not strategically thinking about what messaging would work, how to handle itself, and what messenger we're sending. You know, we often see those voices thinking about Mark Regev, which I think is brilliant man, but he has a very thick accent that is not
Right.
Israeli accent. If we had more Israeli speaking, if we had people that did not have a perfect Oxford English accent and were rolling their eyes at the journalists that they're speaking to, that would have put us in a better place. So yeah, that's just based on our research and the data that we have.
Yeah, I think it is important to bring Israeli voices that are notably Israeli and not, you know, not from the outside.
Right.
So, you know, a lot of celebrities in Hollywood have gone to your page to get information from because they feel that you're the most relatable one at the time, like this time. And so have you ever had any surprises from specific celebrities that reached out to you to ask questions?
I mean, I'm always surprised by celebrities and A-listers that tell me that have been following my work for so long and that they've seen my work. Some of them are I've been engaging in it for years, and yeah, I mean, it's really nice to have those people like, you know, Gal Gadot and Pink and A-listers that are engaging with my work and think that Amy Schumer or Jessica Seinfeld,
Yeah.
so many of them have been sharing and posting and thanking me, so that it's a nice thing to know that I can help them. I think that there's a lack of nuanced voices out there. The fact that just me out of all of the, you know, there's so many institutions, so many voices that are sharing content, and those celebrities are feeling most comfortable with me and maybe a few others. It tells you how dire the situation is. There should be
Yeah.
way more many people that celebrities and people that are public figures would feel comfortable sharing and engaging with. But I get it. I mean, I'm not sharing every post on my social media, and I have a team that looks into every post we're sharing and everything we put out there, because once you share something on social media, you're taking everything with it. You're
Right.
taking baggage and whoever this person is, what they said before, you're basically agreeing with everything. It shouldn't be like this, but this
No.
is the reality.
Yeah. And I see
Um,
that you've been really good about if you're posting something that you find inaccurate afterwards, you apologize and remove it right away. So that's good. You know, we see
yeah,
like all the BBC and all these places that they blast, you know, the news, like and their newspapers and everything with things that are not even inaccurate. They're like wrong, 100% wrong. And they blast them anyway. And then a few days later, oh, we're sorry, it's not correct. But
right.
it's too late.
Yeah, no, we've seen it so often. And sometimes people would tell me in direct message that I shouldn't apologize. And even if I made mistake, I had sources to back my claims. But it doesn't matter. I hold myself to a higher standard. I'm not holding myself to the standard of the BBC or CNN.
Right.
I
Thank
hold
goodness.
myself, yeah. How other people conduct themselves in this war is not a measurement for us. If it was, we would behave like Hamas does, and we're not. We're not like them. We're
Right.
not. We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard because this is who we are.
Right. So speaking of BBC and all these networks, you've been interviewed by a lot of them. And I know a lot of them, particularly in the UK, they've been very anti-Israel, like extremely biased against Israel. And I think they've been like this for a while, but I think we've seen it much more in the past year. Has there been like any specific interview you remember that was extremely difficult to go through with the interviewer being very difficult, or like the guest speakers?
Yeah, I think the most memorable one for me was with Owen Jones, a journalist for The Guardian, that was invited to Sky News to debate me. And I've seen a lot. I've been on TV on those interviews for 12 years now, invited quite regularly to debate or to address issues, and I know what it's like. And when I speak to a person, I don't think about how I'm going to come back at them. It's not the point. I want to hear what they're saying. I want to understand what their point of view is. And then maybe we can find places we agree, and maybe there's some things that we're not going to agree on. And Owen Jones it was just shooting over and over again, lies and misinformation. And the guy was just so apathetic to the Israeli side and to Jews. And I remember sitting there being really shocked by this person. I knew he wasn't a friend of Israel by any means. I knew he wasn't a friend of the Jewish community. I've criticized him online, but I've never seen someone so monstrous sitting in front of me and talking about an issue that is so important and thinking that he's the one that is on the side of humanity, which obviously is not. I mean, I think it was the first time that I almost got up and left the interview
Oh, wow.
in a TV setting. Yeah, and it was that upsetting. But I mean, the good part is that I wasn't the only one that saw it, other than the viewers, of course. That we measure the influence of both sides, and it seems like over 70% of the viewers that were not involved were ending up on my side than his. But even Sky News themselves later on decided to stop inviting him. He wasn't on Sky News ever since then, while I've been invited over and over again, as recent as last week to 2 weeks ago to speak on Sky News. So that for me is a measurement of success, that I wasn't, I didn't resort into calling him names or being upset or turning angry or rolling my eyes at, as I mentioned earlier. I think that's not
hats off to you. It's difficult, so difficult. I don't know. So, like, speaking of that, so how has it been for you dealing with all of this stuff? Because I'm sure you've received so much hate online, and you received all kinds of crazy messages, probably.
Yeah, online and offline, and I mean, walking the streets of London and America. Most of the comments I'm receiving are very positive. I mean, I get people coming up to me and very often in tears, just giving me a hug or saying thank you, and that really gives me so much strength. But there are times that people are saying negative things or I mean, shoving me or doing things that I.
Oh, wow.
And of course,
physical also?
Yeah, it happens, but that's the reality, and that's the reality of putting yourself out there. I'm not just an organization or a logo. I'm a human being, and I'm putting my ideas and my thoughts, and I know that that's a risk that I'm putting, that I have to deal with. But it's important. It's more important than someone saying me. I mean, comments don't get to me. People said the worst you can think of. I don't think there's anything that surprises me these days when I hear on social media comments against me. So comments don't get to me, and even when I see people in person, it doesn't get to me. I focus on the good. I focus on the people that thank me. I focus on the people that I mean something to them, that my work means something to them. And whenever it's hard, I just, I think about my grandparents. I think about our ancestors, how harder it was for them. And I'm grateful that we have a country now. I'm grateful that I can feel safe, and that if I ever get into trouble abroad, I have Israel. And I think that's the feeling that keeps all of us going.
Yeah, it's important to do that, and it's amazing how you and a few other people have managed to keep going despite all the hate online, despite all the hate in the streets. There's a lot going on, especially for you. You live in the UK, right? And over there, it's been really bad this past year.
Yeah, it's been tremendously difficult for Jews in this country. It's been like this for a long time. I mean, the fact that we had Jeremy Corbyn running to becoming prime minister, and that a person that everyone here in the Jewish community almost unanimously agreed engaged with anti-Semitism, and yet he was able to lead the second biggest party in this country, and is still an MP in the British Parliament. So that is really concerning, and it tells you the way that the British people have become so desensitized to anti-Semitism that someone like this is, while he's condemned, is still having a seat in the parliament. It's, I think it's a sign, and I think the fact that the British police, the police specifically in London, is not doing enough to protect Jews in this country is very frightening, because I think for Jews, we always have the police, we always have the law on our side, so we know that we are safe. But once we lose that, then it becomes really dangerous, and Jews will leave. And I think that's what you've seen in France. The French Jewish community is living in mass numbers because they see that the police and the authorities are not backing them up. Even when there was murders in the past of Jews, the police and the authorities have not been strong enough on calling it out, or handling the perpetrators of this violence against Jews. And I think once you feel like you're not protected in this way, it's one thing to have comments, it's one thing to have protests, but when you feel unsafe, then you leave.
Yes, that's for sure. I mean, I know there are a few people, I have family and friends that, I mean, we've both seen how bad it's gotten over there, but they stand their ground. That's their home, that's where they lived, most of their lives, and that's where they want to stay. And I respect that. I just feel like at this point, there's really not much for the Jewish community to do over there. It's too much.
Yeah, no, I respect that as well, and that's part of why I'm staying in London. I mean, I spend my time between Tel Aviv and London, but and America. But the reason that I'm not going back to Israel permanently is because I feel like it's much more helpful to Israel and to the Jewish people to have a voice here that is continuing to fight and that is not backing down. I don't want to let them win. So. And I don't think they will win. I have faith in the British public here, and I have faith in Americans. I have faith in the West to come to their senses. Hopefully earlier than
sooner.
later.
Yeah, I think history's shown that eventually our haters disappear, and there are always new ones coming up throughout the way, but that's how it's been. So you've been speaking in the U.S. as well on college campuses. Has there been any specific encounter that you remember of you talking to someone who was on the other side and you got them to think about it more and maybe change your mind a little bit?
Yeah, so many times, because my approach is never to confront people and make them feel stupid or call them out or debating them in a way that would make them feel like they don't know what they're talking about, because, by the way, often they don't know what they're talking about. But everything I do, everything we do at the Tel Aviv Institute and myself with my work is meant to allow people to feel like they can engage and come to their own conclusions, and not feel like, if someone comes to you and tells you don't know anything about this topic that you're talking about, you're stupid, you don't have any understanding of anything or history, you're probably not going to try to even listen to this person to tell you how not educated you are. I think that once you approach people in a way that is giving them an opening for a genuine conversation, that they feel like they're being heard, that goes a long way. And there has been so many places, and if even anti-Zionist Jewish students coming to my talks and leaving the talks telling me, like, I never thought that I would listen to an Israeli and accept their point of view, and I thought that you guys all hate Palestinians, or even Palestinians that came to my talks in American college campuses that have changed their minds after. I'm not telling you that they all are going to carry an Israeli flag now to the encampment, but they're much more open to listening to our perspective. And I think the most important tool that I have is the social media, because after they come to my talk, they continue to engage on social media. That's why my content is so middle of the road. It's a place where people can have conversation, have different opinions. In my comments, people have all sorts of different opinions, but it's all I do is focusing on humanity of both Israelis and Palestinians, innocent Palestinians that are suffering and innocent Israelis, and speaking about the hostages and finding things that we can all agree on. I don't think that anyone wants to see hostages. Well, yeah, some people want to see hostages dying, but I think most
Unfortunately,
people,
yeah.
yeah, I think most people are reasonable, and we can't focus on the extreme and thinking that the extreme represents the broader audience that we're trying to reach. We have to maintain the approach that is focusing on people that can be swayed and bringing a message to them that will be able to bring them closer to us, even if it's not, again, totally becoming pro-Israel, but just to see the other side, see that we are human beings, see that we are on the side of peace. Because that's the other thing I often see on social media, that and also in real life when I meet people, they're telling me things like, I can't believe that I'm on the side that wants this war to continue. And I'm saying, you're not. You're not on the side that wants this war to
Right.
continue. We have been so gaslighted into the point that we think that speaking up for the hostages and calling for the hostages release is somehow wanting this war to continue. We don't want this war to continue. We didn't want this war to start. We want it to end. We want to do everything we can to release our family members, our hostages that are held in Gaza, that Hamas has over and over again, even according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, that just said in an interview to the New York Times, Hamas was the reason that no hostage deal was achieved. Every time the world has turned on Israel, Hamas decided to pull back from a ceasefire agreement. So I think it's just important for us to remind ourselves that we are on the side of good, we are on the side that wants justice, and we are not on the side of war. We are on the side that wants to end this war. The reason this war continues is because of the other side. Because
Right.
when they say ceasefire, they don't mean that. They're just saying it so we would think that we are against ceasefire. Now, of course, we are pro-ceasefire. Calling for the release of the hostages is calling for a ceasefire.
Right. And I don't think it's even ceasefire. I think we all want the war to end, period. We want everything to end. We want the hostages to come home. I mean, and that has to be number one. I mean, we can't end anything without them coming home. We want them to be home. We want them to be where they're supposed to be. And we want everything to end. We don't want to go through war after war after war like it's been going on for years. We're over it. We've been over it. We never wanted it to begin with. And that's what I feel like the world fails to understand. We don't want this war. We don't want a war to, like, period, so we'll see what happens. I mean, I know there've been talks about a deal and all these things, but I don't know. I'm not 100% optimistic, unfortunately, because of the past year, but I hope that something will happen and the hostages will be freed, and we'll try to somehow go back to normal in a way, some kind of normal.
Yeah, the new normal. But yeah, I agree. I think the priority is to bring back those hostages to their families. We have responsibility for them.
Yeah. So throughout your activism and all these things, you've been mentioning Sephardi and Mizrachi Jews a lot. That was one of your main focuses, which I love because I haven't heard from many people before. I think only the past year I've been hearing more voices from Iranian Jews and more of that, like Yemeni Jews. And I know you're Mizrachi. I'm Sephardi also. My family's from Morocco. Why was it so important to you to speak about this? And even you wrote a book about it also. Why has it been one of your main focuses?
Yeah, it was very difficult to speak about it back then. I know now there's so many voices speaking about it, and it's so important. But someone wrote to me the other day, said sharing some content from Mizrachi voices that are pro-Israel, and they said, you had to run so that these people could walk, that they can speak about this more freely. And I think I contributed a lot to the conversation. I felt like the way that Jews have been represented in the West was through a very specific lens. The way that you see Jews in Hollywood or in pop culture in America, it's very specific. It's either Woody Allen, or you think about Sarah Silverman, and you think about Bagel and Lox, and I think it's amazing part of Jewish identity. It's a part that I'm connecting to as well. I love bagels and lox, and I love Sarah Silverman, and I think Ashkenazi Jewish culture is a beautiful one that survived horrific violence and a genocide, that we need to celebrate, and we need to enjoy it and partake in it. But I think that Jewish identity is not a pool that can fit only some amount of swimmers.
Right.
There's room for as many swimmers as we want. And I felt like the Mizrachi story, or the Sephardi story, I use the term Mizrachi because as someone that is not Orthodox or religiously Jewish,
Yeah.
my identity is more on my culture and being Jewish in society, even if I'm secular. That's why the term Mizrachi, which means East, the Eastern Jews, feels more relevant to me. So I just felt like this story needs to be told. I felt like it's something that many Jews don't know. I had responses to my book from Jews that told me they had no clue about Mizrachi Jews. They didn't even know that we existed. So that was an important part of telling the story. And I think more than just telling the story of this 850,000 Jews that were forced out from the Middle East and North Africa between the years of 41 to 72, it was also important for me to elevate the conversation about Israel and to make sure that people understand that Jews come from Israel. And even if we lived in close proximity to the land of Israel, like my family, they lived in diaspora, they lived in Iraq and Tunisia, but they were closer to the land of Israel. But it doesn't mean that they were living in the land of Israel, right? So it doesn't matter if you live in Iraq or in Yemen or in Europe or in the Amazons, you are still in diaspora. And you always want to go back to the land of Israel. So it was also a way to look at Jewish indigeneity, which I talk a lot about in my book, on the indigenous connection of Jews to this land and how this connection doesn't expire. So what I was trying to do is not to take room from conversation about other type of Jewish identities, but just to expand it and to remind everyone that this is unity through diversity. It's to look into how different but beautiful Jewish identities are. But at the end of the day, at our core, we're all Jews. We all come from the land of Israel. We all pray the same prayers in different tunes. We eat similar but different food. But we are all, in our core, we are one family. And even if we lived in a diaspora for a few hundred years, we still are able to go back to our land, and we should have this right, the right to engage in our ancestral homeland and to live there and to defend ourselves. That's what I'm advocating for.
That's great. It's very important. I feel like, when I moved here to Maryland, when I first started working at Bethel, it's obviously Ashkenazi, like most of the area is Ashkenazi Jews. And all of a sudden this Israeli Sephardi girl walked in, and people, like some older folks, talked to me and were like, "Oh, really? Your parents were born in Morocco? Really? Wow!" Like they were really surprised to see someone that was not Ashkenazi. So I feel like it's really important because there's not a lot of knowledge about it, outside of Israel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, because in Israel, majority of Jews in Israel are Jews, Mizrachi Jews, Sephardi Jews, Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. But the other thing is that I think a lot of Jews are confused to thinking that we fit the American definition of white, being white very neatly, and we're not. Jews are diverse. It doesn't matter if we lived in it doesn't matter if we're Ashkenazi Jews from Europe or if we are Mizrachi Jews from the Middle East. None of us are fitting the definition of whiteness in America. And to remind Jews of this diversity, I think, helps Jews find their identity and connect to it in a stronger way.
Yeah. So your book's name is The Wrong Kind of Jew, a Mizrachi Manifesto. Where can people get it if they want to learn more about it?
You can order it online on Barnes & Noble or Amazon or wherever you get your books, and I'll print it and ship it to you.
Okay. So how was it like for you growing up in Israel?
I had a happy childhood. I come from a family of refugees. Really, my grandparents were forced out of Iraq and Tunisia, so it's not like I grew up with wealth or comfortness. We lived in. My grandmother had to live in one house with 12 kids, which was very difficult for her. But yeah, I grew up in Petah Tikva. I was a very happy child. And yeah, I mean, I was always very proud of my family's identity, but I wasn't talking about it as much. I felt like if I just forget about it and leave it in the back, the back seat, would do better in life. Thinking that, if I'm only behaving more European or more Western, it will be better. And only recent years, I became more engaged and learning more about my family's history and this culture that I grew up with, but I wasn't as um, I didn't participate in it as much as I did in the last as I do in the last decade or so. Um, but my childhood was very happy generally. Of course, I faced the second Intifada like most Israelis when I was 12, and I survived a terror attack right outside of an ice cream shop. Um, and that really led me to want to do something to fight to end this conflict and for peace. And when I turned 18, and most of my friends joined combat units, because I think we all grew up with the Intifada, we wanted to do something to fight for the security of Israel. My approach was to find a way to fight for the security of Israel through bringing peace. So I joined the COGAT unit, the humanitarian unit of the IDF, and I was working with Palestinian civilians and the UN and the Red Cross and all of the organizations we hear about today. That was my work back then, to facilitate humanitarian aid, to work with those organizations and be an intermediary between them and the IDF and the Palestinian authorities. But yeah, just basically being a peace building officer in the army for 5 years. I served in Hebron, Ramallah, Jerusalem, and in Gaza for a little bit. And I've done that until 2012.
Wow. Yeah, Israel was different in the 90s, for sure.
Definitely.
I vividly remember of the whole time with the Intifadas and the 90s and the early 2000s. It was not a fun time, but we've gone through that as well. We've lived through it, some of us. Yeah. So, do you have any new projects coming up? Anything you want to share?
I think the important thing that I hope people would take away from our conversation is the point about messaging and how to convince people and not to do what the knee-jerk reaction is, and to not always say what we feel, but to think more strategically about that. And that is what we're doing at the Tel Aviv Institute. You can learn more about it at tlvi.org, but we work with social media influencers, Jewish ones, and some non-Jews as well. And we help them better their messaging to their audience. And we have now 150 influencers in our network, and we're continuing to build that. We're also looking into working with minorities from the Middle East that are they don't have to be outspokenly pro-Israel, but we know that they are pro-Israel, and we're working with them to support their messaging and to help build a different Middle East. But yeah, you can learn more about it at the Tel Aviv Institute. It's tlvi.org. While we're called the Tel Aviv Institute, we are an American nonprofit focusing on data-driven solutions to anti-Semitism and hate online.
Okay, and we'll put the link in the description as well. And last thing, I have a little segment called My Favorite Israeli Thing. Just a few little things. What is your favorite Israeli childhood memory?
My favorite Israeli childhood memory. But one thing that comes to my mind is that when my mom came to pick me up from kindergarten, that the first thing that I thought about is just to see her coming to take me. I'm my mama's boy, so I'm very connected to my mom. So yeah, so that's the memory.
What is your favorite Israeli song? Could be from the past few years, could be from something old.
I would say Ewa, the Yemenite girl band. They have a song about coming back to Israel from Yemen and the challenges that they face in Israel. So I'm blanking on the name, but Ewa. Actually, any song.
Okay. What is your favorite Israeli collaborator that you worked with?
Oh wow, there's amazing Israeli voices. I would name Emily Schrader. She's wonderful. Noah Tishby, I think she's doing great work. Youssef Haddad, the Israeli Arab activist that I think also is doing amazing work. Yirmiyahu Danzig is part of Unpacked for Educator. I think is doing incredible work on social media, and I was proud to work with him just when he started as part of Tel Aviv Institute. He was part of our program. Emily was as well, and Youssef. Most of the
they're amazing.
Yeah, most of the voices that I think are the most effective ones have we had close relationship with. So I'm very proud of all of them.
And lastly, what is your favorite Hebrew word or expression?
Oh, I guess Yala was that's in Arabic, right? But more specifically, how Yala is being used in Hebrew, because Yala can be used for literally everything in Israel. It can mean let's go. It can mean come on. It can mean great idea. It can mean so many things. So yeah, I guess that's the most practical word to use in Israel.
Yeah, I think that's one of the few Hebrew words my daughter knows that I always use. Yalla, let's go.
Yalla.
Yeah. All right, Hen, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. And I look forward to seeing what's next for you, what you're going to do next with the Tel Aviv Institute and everything else on social media.
Thank you, Esti. It was a pleasure. And really, I'd love to come back sometime soon.
Yes, please. And hopefully we'll have you in Maryland, if possible, in Baltimore. We'd love to have you. Yeah. All right. Thank you all for listening. Until next time.